I Was Never Alone by Omar Cuellar. There is nothing more detestable than living alone, and at the same time being certain that I am never alone. To tell the truth, I don't think I've ever been alone, and this is starting to not only unnerve me, but affect my mental well-being. My name is Tom, and I was born in 1988 in Providence, Rhode Island. This is where my story begins, but the city of Boston is where my story begins. I am currently 36 years old and work for Beacon Consulting Group, a consulting firm in the city of Boston, Massachusetts. This story begins specifically because, one afternoon, a coworker asked me, "Why haven't you gotten married? Why don't you have children yet?" I knew perfectly well the real reason why I had not married, and perhaps that reason was at that moment watching me from above, even silently mocking me, and the response I was about to utter. I think it has been my destiny to never start a family. My coworker either didn't know what to say, or she was surprised, or maybe she thought I was a closet homosexual. But the truth is that an expression appeared on her face as if I had just given her an answer somewhere. Another language, a language that he might also not like, because he had never seen such a disgusted facial expression. He quickly changed the topic of conversation, and I felt relieved, because I didn't feel like remembering or thinking about the terrible secret that has been eating away at me since I was a child. That afternoon, as usual, I stayed in the office, waiting for all the workers there to leave and leave me alone with my thoughts, and then some. On my desk, and next to my computer, was a can of Red Bull from which I had been drinking a few moments before, and on which my gaze now rested. I started to think about why I hadn't gotten married or started a family, and I couldn't help but travel in my thoughts to the city of Providence, Rhode Island, when I was still a child and everything had begun. The first time I didn't know very well what was happening, but being an only child and living without pets, it soon became very clear to me that the faint breathing, which from time to time I could hear behind the closet or under my bed, it came from a presence that he could neither glimpse nor explain with mere words. The only thing he was sure of was that the sound of that breathing was constant. I told my parents what I was hearing, and of course, at first they didn't believe me, but after convincing them to come to my room and listen behind the closet doors, behind the small panes of my windows, and underneath from my bed, they almost fell on their backs with fright when they were faced with the harsh and terrible reality that their son was indeed not lying. There in those crevices of my room there was nothing or no one, but you could hear the faint sound of something or someone, exhaling air constantly. Terrified by what was happening, my parents decided to put the house up for sale. They never told potential buyers what was happening in my room, and during the 6 months that my parents had to wait to sell the house, we moved to my grandparents' house. The first night I slept in my new room, my mother made sure that there were none of those strange sounds in any crevice or corner of my room. It was in those moments that I regretted not having had another child to keep me company now, in those difficult and surreal times for the family. "You'll be fine," my mother told me, very sure of herself. "If you hear any strange sounds again, don't hesitate to wake us up. Then you can sleep with us or with the grandparents." I had insisted to my mother that I would be fine alone, even though she had previously offered to spend the night with them in their room, because I honestly felt very emboldened. In those days, although I was only 11 years old, and a few months ago horror movies made me very afraid. A book by the writer Howard Phillips Lovecraft, a native of my same city, had recently fallen into my hands. In that book there was a story called The Hidden Horror, and I had not taken long to identify with the protagonist, who was not afraid of the monster or the unidentified presence that was hiding and lurking in the mountain of storms. That's how I decided to spend the first night alone in what would be my new room. I still remember it clearly. That night I was having a hard time falling asleep, so I decided to read a little under the dim light of the spotlight in my room. That night, even though I had a small desk, I decided to read sitting on the floor, leaning my back against one of the walls, thus allowing me to turn around and glimpse the clouds that were hovering over our neighborhood and that were now sneaking up on me. Window under the dim moonlight. In those days I was obsessed with the story I previously mentioned, The Hidden Horror. So I picked up my book, opened it very excited, and began to read aloud. Thunder shook the air of the night. I went to the uninhabited mansion, high on Storm Mountain, to search for the hidden horror. He was not alone, because recklessness was not then part of that love of the grotesque and the terrible that has adopted the search for strange horrors in literature and in life as a career. With me there was. At that moment, I realized it. It was again that horrible and maddening sound similar to someone or something breathing under my bed. Although at first I was extremely scared, I gathered my courage and grabbed one of the flashlights that I had kept in one of the desks in my drawer. I quickly turned it on and pointed its light into the dark depths beneath my bed. Nothing. He couldn't see anything, but he could still clearly hear that terrible, ominous sound. I was determined to go to my parents to notify them that the strange presence was again under my bed, and that it had surely followed us from the house that my parents were now planning to put up for sale. But then I remembered how reckless the protagonist in the story that I was reading a moment ago, and then I wanted to become him. So I devised a plan, which I didn't know if it was going to work. Under the dim light of my room, I sat down again in the same position on the floor, leaning my back against one of the walls, in front of my bed, where that eerie sound was still coming from. And what did I do? I started reading. I read aloud, and I read again and again, while that strange sound coming from under my bed persisted, until I finally reached the end of the story. And so the rhythm of the strange breathing changed, and it wouldn't be years later, until I became an adult, that I would discover that that strange presence had had an orgasm. That's how I learned that the presence liked me to read aloud to it. And so every night I read to it, just like a mother or father reads stories to their child. Intrigued by what that strange presence that could not be seen would look like, instead of reading aloud to him, it occurred to me to try something new. It was one night, after 3 months, when I began to dance frantically like a professional ballet dancer, while the G minor prelude to Rachmaninoff's Opus 23 No. 5 was playing at full volume in my room, that the presence was encouraged to manifest itself. It was a strange creature, black and hairy, not very big and with grotesque, long, and fearsome claws. I should never have been frightened by its appearance, because having done so, the creature timidly took refuge in the darkness again and vanished in it. Since then, the only thing I can hear all the time is his breathing, which always accompanies me at all times when I am really alone. That breath was present the first time I masturbated. That breath accompanied me the first time I sobbed alone in my room. Since then, I read aloud every night to that creature, and even now that I am a 36-year-old adult, I am teaching her to dance, while she is hidden behind the air conditioning system in my office. That creature does not know that I have been recording it at night. When I leave my office, the creature comes out of its corner and imitates the dance steps that I have taught it, because that creature does not know that I consider it as my son, a son that I started raising since I was 11 years old. The end.